Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, and this is Chamber Chats. I would like to acknowledge the support of C-SPAN Victoria Shipyards and of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union, for making this program happen. I would like, as always, to acknowledge that I live and work in the ancestral territories of the Lekwungen-speaking First Nations, in particular the Songhees and the Esquimalt, and it's our privilege and pleasure to work alongside them. We're having a series of conversations on Chamber Chats with regional mayors. So our largest municipality is a member in good standing of the Chamber. That is the District of Saanich, and my pleasure to welcome the Mayor of Saanich, Fred Haynes. Mayor, how are you?
I'm very well, Bruce, and thank you for this opportunity to chat with the Chamber and the viewers. It's a great privilege to be in this role, and one of the things that we do want to do is reach out and communicate with the great residents of Saanich.
To point out sometimes that people may not know this, but my name is actually Fred, because my first name is Frederick. Bruce is my middle name, so it's the Fred and Fred show here today. Fred, Saanich is a kind of a unique place. I mean, when you take a look at it, it's the largest population. There is residential, there's commercial, there's industrial, and there's that whole rural part to Saanich too.
Got
How does that create a unique governance model for the district to work?
Actually, it's a fascinating piece, and some of the staff come here for that challenge. Well, what we're committed to as a council, and what I ran on in 2014, 2018, is to preserve that rural, urban, forest, coastal mix for future generations. And what that boils down to is that we have an urban containment boundary, which is inside of which is about 45% of the land of Saanich. We are geographically not just the largest on the island, but second largest in BC, and by population, eighth largest. When you put those two numbers, eighth largest population and second largest lands, it means we have a lot of land for not that many people. So we have a lot of our land is low density, and then we're concentrating our density inside the urban containment boundary, and along our villages, corridors and centres is where we see the higher density, 4 to 6 buildings, etc. going. We're an older municipality. We prize the rural aspect of it, and we work very hard on preserving that, as well as our parklands. One of the things we do have, because of our size, is 170 parks, and some of the best parks in the region.
Yeah, because when you take a look at a normal rather urban model and what Public Works does, they concentrate on sewers and streets. But
Yes.
you've got open farm fields and you've got large tracts of commercial, agricultural land, and commercial built into that. So how does that whole dynamic function all the time? Because there's a lot of moving parts there.
There's a lot of moving parts, and it talks to our tax base too, Bruce, which is a financial piece that we work with. Economically, we don't get very much at all from industrial space here because we don't have a lot of it. From the non-residential taxes, we get about 23% of our annual budget. The rest is on the homeowners. And one of the things we're faced with the large municipality, each year our tax lift, a big part of that, about 2.3% every year, is you mentioned Public Works, the union workers and the police, the fire, the staff. You know, there's a requirement to look after our people, to get good people here. So that's a fixed lift to our budget. What we're trying to do is expand our non-residential economic area.
So you've got strategies in place all the time. There's the official community plan (OCPs) that municipalities
Yeah.
have in place, but there's short term, there's mid term, and there's long term planning that has to be in place.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the percentage of each of those happening right now. How much of the planning is short term, how much is mid, and how much is long?
Well, one of the things that we face, Bruce, on this point, and I wasn't expecting this question, but it's a good segue, is some of our local area plans are from the last century.
Wow.
We're trying to build for the next century. We have local area plans from 1995, and there's 12 of them. We're going for a series of renewing them. But what we realize is the time to do that is extensive, and we don't have that privilege of time. We're dealing with a climate change emergency, a housing crisis, and a number of other things I hope we get to. So what we've done is implement a new approach for now, which is to suspend the local area plans while we look at housing across all of Saanich. Why would we do that? Well, if you're doing active transportation, the bicycle routes and the sidewalks and the bus transit. You want to deal with the whole municipality. You don't want little pockets of it. The same for climate change and our tree canopy. We look at the whole thing across all of Saanich and how it integrates with the region. We've done the same with our housing plan. The work started 2 years ago in terms of concept. It was activated about 18 months ago, with the work really starting 13 months ago. We had a task force across the spectrum of housing, from community association, business, etc., housing experts. And then that's come into a housing strategy for all of Saanich. And it reinforces how we're going to go forward for the next 10 years.
So let's talk a little bit more about that housing strategy. Obviously, during the pandemic, we've seen the price of housing skyrocket, whether it's rental or whether it's ownership. It's just, so what is the housing strategy that's in place now, and how is that going to be executed?
Thank you. So what we're looking at is to increase the diversity of our housing and filling where we call the missing middle. We have people who live here now that want to downsize, and there's not available housing stock for them. And we know that aged persons, people in their golden years, do better if they can stay in their neighborhood but relocate from a large house to a smaller house. Within that, we've looked at allowing garden suites on the larger properties of 500, 750 to 1,000 square feet. That gives intergenerational flexibility on that single family lot. It gives mortgage helper. It lets children come into the housing, live with mum and dad, but not necessarily in the same house. That gives a bit of flexibility. We're getting a very big uptake on that, with over 40 units being applied for. But on the bigger scheme, we're looking at multi-family, 4 to 6 story along our corridors and villages and centres. Single family would be infill, gentle infill, going to duplexes. The idea of 3-floor walk-ups. We're doing a special zoning in Saanich, which has been used elsewhere, for 3-floor walk-ups, where you can take a single-family lot on the edge of the single-family area near a corridor and put maybe 12 units in there. We understand that the issue is supply, Bruce. How can we have our children and grandchildren and the essential workers we need live and work in Saanich? Live and work in the same place is part of the answer to climate change. Right now, we have people traveling in from Duncan, from Souk, which are lovely places, but that's a huge journey to get here. We need people to be able to live, work, and play in Saanich, and that's part of what we hope the current plans are going to address.
I know there are some plans that are pending, and you may not be able to say much about this, but that sort of innovative housing strategy that you're talking about includes this multi-generational parkland daycare being built into it. So I know that there's one around Elk Lake that I believe Garrick Construction is looking at doing, and the Shelburne Plaza plan where the Home Depot is a company called Westbuild. Both of those are they're very innovative and different kind of plans, right?
What we've said to those who want to bring forward multifamily housing is that the vision we have is a community where the parents have their children, they can walk to the daycare in the same building or within walking distance. And if they're going to work, they can work in the same area. As you know, the Uptown Douglas corridor, Shelburne corridor, is about 40% of the working population of the region. It's a massive area for employment. So why can't we have people living there? So the idea would be in these large multifamily ones like the University Heights, which is coming back to council September 27. It's 650 units. In there, we envision there's over 120,000 square foot of commercial, so there's jobs, but we've asked for daycare. We're asking for medical, dental, and all those support services that let families get by and save not just time and cost for vehicles, but have more quality time for their families and their leisure pursuits. So we think it's a higher level of vibrant living. The spend will stay local. And then if people don't need the second car, we're really pushing on bicycles. Many of these multi-units are coming forward with 3 times the bicycle storage than the actual unit number. So it's quite ambitious. We're quite dismayed when we look around Saanich and we look at the older building stock and you go into some of the parking areas, they're not fully used. So we think there's a change needed in our parking requirements. We're sensitive to on-street parking. We don't want to push on-street parking, but we've actually started to witness, Bruce, and I think you'll recognize that too, a shift in the number of cars that people are buying. The younger people are not buying car, and in fact, MOTI, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, say that there's a 1.5 to 2% decline in motor vehicles use in the region, which is interesting. So we know there's going to be an increased population, which will bring forward more car use. But we think as a community, addressing climate change, addressing cost of living, we need to now to move towards a less auto-centric lifestyle.
Yeah, so you've identified housing and climate change and transportation, all of which are interconnected. So I want to pick up on that next in the conversation and talk about what's going on in Saanich with mitigation of climate change. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Fred Haynes. He's the mayor of the district of Saanich. And Fred, you and I have had these conversations for a number of years now about how things like housing, climate, and transportation all kind of link together. So climate change is real. It's happening. It's been happening for quite some time. Uh, you're involved in something called One Planet
Yes,
the
thank you.
district. Tell me about that.
So this is something that is bigger than just climate change. What it talks about is the whole sustainability of the planet. Now, climate is incredibly important, but there's also the world resources. And we know that in Saanich, we residents, like most Canadians, we live in 3.5 to 4 consumptions of planet. So if everybody lived the same way we did, it would take 4 planets, 3.5, 4 planets. So we're saying, let's reduce our planetary impact ecologically. And the idea is to live within a one planet sustainability. And it also recognizes that governments themselves, Bruce, whether they're federal, provincial, or municipal, we can't do this alone. We need every resident to look at what can they do to reduce the number of times they go to the shops, consolidate. Can they hang washing on the line? Now, our electrical grid is very renewable, but this idea of reducing the use of resources, can they grow their food? These are all small gestures, but the One Planet program, it's online at Saanich, and it has a series of models. And we have schools, we have students, we have faith-based groups, we have banks, we have industry joining this to see what can they do in their, not just their personal lives, but in their organizational life to reduce their consumption of goods and their contribution to the carbon footprint.
You know, when it comes to climate change, a couple of things that are very obvious obstacles in that from what I think we've all seen. One is convenience. People don't necessarily want to do
Right.
something because it's not convenient to them. And there's also those that are still in denial about climate
Correct.
change. What do you say to those people?
Well, when you look at BC burning up year after year, when you look at the drop of water tables, if you look at the water table in California, it is disappearing. There's a real concern that 15 years out now, maybe they won't be able to grow the second and third harvests because they just won't have the water. Anybody who is in denial of that, it's very hard because they're clearly not listening to the science. It's actually an emotional belief. But what I would say is that the vast majority now believe in climate change. And even if they would say it's not climate change caused by man, caused by human being activity, we see greater storm events. We are preparing now in Saanich for larger ocean levels.
Mhm.
And that's a thing across the US, across Europe. Governments around the world are preparing for a raise in sea level. Where's that raise coming from? It's coming from melting ice caps. It's coming from reduction in glaciers. And a reduction in glaciers is going to be something that affects the water across North America. We are blessed here in the capital regional districts, and the Chamber knows that one of our competitive advantages is our amazing water supply. We probably have water supply on current usage for the next 50 to 100 years without problem. Longer, drier summers with shorter, wetter winters will supply our reservoirs. But we know that the residents across the region are consuming less water.
Mhm.
So we're doing our part there. But for climate change deniers, it's the same as anti-vaxxers. What do we say to people who will not listen to the science?
Yeah. Well, as we always say, just get vaccinated. That's the only way we're going to get out of this. We have to have the vaccinations. We've had the mask mandate put back in place. It beats another lockdown, right? If we want to go through that, we cannot withstand another lockdown. The economy would collapse if that happened. You
Well,
mentioned,
Bruce, on that piece, just
yeah,
the love of their own family. We know that those in the unvaccinated group, there's about 1.5 million of them in the province. And we just heard today that the bookings of vaccinations has just gone right up again. So we're pleased about that. But they're putting their own mothers and fathers, grandparents at risk and their children. And I think that message is slowly getting there. And we see down in the States, some of the more resistant areas, the Republican areas, are starting to acknowledge, hey, we need to get vaccinations.
this is my personal opinion on this, not affiliated with the chamber necessarily, but those who say that we are infringing on their civil liberties, the fact that they are not participating in vaccination and masking violates my civil liberties because it means that I can't get back the freedom that we used to have to operate on a semi-normal. But anyway, that's just me ranting. So you had mentioned as well about the densification along major routes, putting 3 and 4 story buildings along there. So a lot of people would say, well, I don't want to live on a major route because it's really loud. But as transit and vehicles electrify, a lot of that noise goes away.
Yeah, so what we've seen, there's a couple of developers out there that actually are building on those major routes, and they're using triple pane glassing in the roadside windows. And when you stand in those units, you cannot hear a sound.
Hmm.
It is remarkable. I've been into some and witnessed it. But yes, the electrification of vehicles and also the reduced number of personal owned vehicles to go to Modi and other vehicles allows electrification of those fleets to have greater use by people. One of the reasons we need to densify along our corridors, Bruce, is the transportation piece you just mentioned.
Yeah.
We need to have an adequate population that will use transit and hopefully perhaps a railway system or some other system to connect us up the island, because that also addresses climate change and it reduces the cost of living. Average cost of a car, 10 to 12,000 a year with maintenance, insurance, gas, etc. Um, Less car use is better for the planet and it's better for the pocketbook. But we understand there's a big transition program. What is really disruptive and a delight to see is the massive uptake in e-bikes and the cargo bikes. And we're seeing entire families going out with a bike, two children and the shopping. And I talk to them and they say, oh, we've done this so we didn't because we didn't want or need the second car.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really excellent example of a disruptive technology coming in, being embraced by the marketplace. And Saanich is actually giving some grants to those people that want to buy an e-bike, and you can find that online.
Well, actually, I'm a recent purchaser of an e-bike, in fact, because I have really old knees and I
Yeah,
couldn't keep
yeah.
up with the other bike that I was riding. But yeah, Amanda and I just ride off for hours and hours, and it's amazing. It's just another way to see this region from the perspective of being on a trail instead of just sticking to the major arteries and routes that we use all the time. But
Some of
yeah,
the sniffy people who are real cyclists, and I've got friends like that, they mock me a little bit because I'm on my e-bike. But we're getting good studies out there saying that, just like you just said, the quality of life on an e-bike includes exercise. It includes being out on the trails. And some of the trails that we have are just remarkable. And this council just approved an extra lift of 2.8 million a year, which was took our tax lift this year from 3.76 to 5.76, was 2 full points. Were about accelerating our climate action plan. And a big piece of that was to increase our tree canopy so people can ride and experience trees, and our cycle paths and our sidewalks. So that is all to that ambience of life that you just talked about.
also talk about a film studio in this
Yeah,
region and in
please.
Saanich. I want to talk about that next. We're talking today on our chamber chat with Fred Haynes. He's the mayor of the district of Saanich. So the film studio project at Camosun, Fred, where's that at? What's going on?
It's going forward very, very well. And you probably know, Bruce, that there's enough room on the South Island for several studios.
Yes.
But we've got to start somewhere. And this is a great example. The provincial government were very kind when they got elected. And I was out campaigning saying, I'll stand with any candidate as the mayor of Saanich to say, let's get a film studio. And I'm doing that in the federal election too. You'll see some of our work going out shortly. But the land is there. It's 6 acres or so at Camosun. Currently, the forestry building's there. I understand that there's a period going forward where the forestry are going to be moving off within 18 months. We got $2 million from the province already to put the roadway in from interurban. And we have $150,000 to do what's called an accelerated business plan. That's expected to be in place by September. The plan has 3 sound stages of about 18 to 20,000 square feet. The entire interior clearance would be 40 feet. They would be over on the south side of the campus where the forestry buildings are, plus 20,000 square feet of production, plus, approximately, plus what's really important and why the college has the advantage, the education and academic piece, to train those future generations. And we've done, since I was elected, we've had 2.5 years of work with Jeff Wilmshurst, Sherry Bell, the current president, the board of directors, the educational ministry, advanced education, and my team that's gone to several movie studios, including having information from Hollywood on what is the state of the art that's needed. And one of the things they need is trained, qualified people. And AYATSU, which is the union, have agreed that anyone who qualifies through the Camosun program, when it's in place, will be certified to work in the film industry. So this won't just be for the benefit of Saanich, but it will be for the benefit of the region and the movie industry, the film industry across Canada.
Yeah, because it would make us a destination point for that. So that if that studio's full, you go to another one. If that one's full, you go to another one. So there's a really robust one we're going to talk about in future weeks on a chamber chat that's going on at the Malahat Nation too. Speaking of
Correct.
which, to wrap this up here, Fred, we at the chamber have a huge priority on creating economic reconciliation with First Nations and Indigenous-owned businesses. And to that end, we have created a First Nations task force that will engage in that economic reconciliation and connect business to business. Tell me about what goes on in Saanich about that sort of thing.
Well, Bruce, first of all, let's just look back a little bit. When you and I were at South Island Prosperity Partnership, working with Emily and that whole team, it was critical that the First Nations were brought into that program of Indigenomics. And I believe that there's a 100% sign up now, sponsored in part by the members to bring in the First Nations and understand the nation need. So, and the Chamber's done the same. This term, we're moving forward with a memorandum of understanding with the Saanichs people. That's coming forward, and it's in place, and we've got tools coming forward. We're looking at them on our land use, and we're very concerned to make sure that there is the Indigenous action, not just talk in our work. It's about we see you, we hear you, and we act with you. So we're doing quite a bit of work with the First Nations.
In general, as the mayor,
Yes.
are you having a good time?
I would say yes. It's actually a fascinating job, Bruce. Example, every day I get up, I have a schedule and a plan, and it gets blown out of the window because emergent issues arise. And I work, and council works hard to get back to those residents with concerns to answer them. But yeah, it's a fascinating job. And here we are trying to plan a vibrant community that's nestled in the wonderful woods, forests, streams. Do you know we have 5 watersheds, 7 lakes? That's the unexplored lakes of Saanich, if you like. How do we plan and equip this for the future such that our children and grandchildren can thrive here? We know that there's going to be an avalanche of people coming to Canada. There'll be a trend to migrate to the West. We already see it. It's how do we plan to keep the quality of life as that arrives in our door? We can't pull up the drawbridge. We have to plan now to preserve all the wonderful things that make Saanich the great place it is. And it's a fascinating challenge. And it's 7 days a week, sometimes more hours than my wife cares for.
Well, as we head into election year next year, there's going to be lots of conversations about who's running and why and where and all the rest of it. But we won't put you on the spot and ask you about that now. But we are going to do this with you.
I will be running next year for a new term on council.
Okay, there it is. Fred Haynes is running again. And Mayor, we're going to do this on a pretty regular basis with you and check in and see what's going on in Saanich, which of course is, again, our largest municipality. A lot of people don't understand the sacrifice that someone makes to enter public life, as you have done and many others. Often thankless, often way too much work. So thank you for stepping up and providing the service that you do. And thank you for tuning into Chamber Chats. We'll see you soon.